Welcome to this discovery session on understanding and working with power in food and agricultural commodity systems. I will introduce myself and my colleagues that are part of the team behind this session will introduce themselves very shortly. And we have people coming in as we speak, but we're going to get kickstarting so that we don't delay any further. I would like to welcome you to this event organized by the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems team through the FACS, Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems community, which is open for everyone to join if you haven't done so yet. Just to say very briefly, the event is going to be recorded and the materials are going to be shared after the session over email. So yeah, you will have access to all the presentation, handouts, and things that we will go through during the session. This is a very participatory session, so we want to create a space where we not only present ideas and concepts, but actually co-create our own definitions, because working with power, and we will discuss that during the session, is a very multidimensional space and a multidimensional process. And it's all about not only conceptualizing it, but the experience, the lived experience of power that we have in our multiple dimensions in life, and how we can apply that to the work that we do. So please, as much as you can, and when, if possible, we will invite you to keep your video on. We will ask you to participate and share your reflections, insights, questions. We will have some breakout sessions to apply the ideas to your work. And this is a discovery session, as we said. More will come in terms of working with power. We will have a deeper dive later on in the year. So stay tuned through our community of practice, the digital platform, and also email, where we will share the invitation for you to join the deep dive. Last but not least, for the breakout groups, if you have a specific preference on language for the breakout rooms that you would like to be paired with someone, let's say, that speaks Spanish or French or any other language that might be in this very diverse group, please send a private message to Alejandra. Alejandra, please, if you can raise your virtual Zoom hand so that everyone knows who you are. Just send a message to Alejandra, and she will consider this information and try to pair you up with someone from the same language preference. So thank you very much. So what are we going to do today? We're going to frame a little bit this conversation around working with power in food and agricultural commodity systems. Part of that framing is to say that this work and this session comes under our efforts to build capacity on skills on multi-stakeholder collaboration and systems change under the global project named FOLUR. And my colleagues will share additional information about FOLUR in the chat in case you want to know more about this global program. I will introduce our hosts and myself in a minute. And then we will dive into the actual lived experience and try to make sense of what is power, starting by reflecting and analyzing our own stories of power. Then we will go into a presentation by one of our experts today in this session, Jethro, on how do we articulate that experience of power? How do we put names to the types of power and the different forms in which power manifests, so that we can articulate the forms of power, the different dimensions of power, and later on then work with them. And what can we do? How can we develop strategies and actions to work through the power imbalances or the power dynamics that might challenge us in our work and impede the progress that we want to see on the ground. We will have a 5-minute break, and then we will come back into a very practical exercise around putting into practice the different forms of power into our day-to-day work, and invite you to think about a specific challenge that you might be facing and how to identify the forms of power that are present there and the different strategies and actions that you can take. And then we will finally conclude with a presentation, a very short presentation, but still very relevant, on how does power show up in food and agricultural commodity systems from a macro perspective, and the work that as UNDP we've been doing in this space to understand better this power dynamics in food and ag, and the different strategies and things that we can do to work through them. Then we will have a closing and next steps, and finalize the session. So very briefly, to introduce why we're in this space of food and agriculture as UNDP, and why it is so relevant for us to work through power dynamics in food and agriculture. As we know, many of you know, because you are practitioners in this space, agriculture accounts for 70% of fresh water use and responsible for 80% of global deforestation. So the impact that agriculture and food systems have on the economy, the environment, and the social systems is massive. The drivers linked to food production cause 70% of terrestrial biodiversity loss, and agriculture accounts for 60% of the labor force and producing 25% of the GDP in low-income countries. And over 2/3 of people surviving on less than $1 a day live and work in rural areas, either as smallholder farmers or as agricultural laborers. So agriculture is at the center of our economic, even political, environmental, and social systems. And equally, food and agricultural commodity systems present a huge opportunity to advance on all of the 17 SDGs. They're equally linked to all of the UNDP strategic plan signature solutions, and they can help, if we make a change and a positive impact, achieve our targets. It's also an opportunity because of the multidimensional nature of food and agriculture. It's a huge opportunity to work in partnership with other UN agencies and outside the UN as well, private sector, other development agencies, and governments at a local level. And it's an opportunity also to leverage private sector finance. Finally, just to say that the FACTS portfolio of UNDP at the moment is of 1.2 billion in 140 countries and 500 landscapes. So there's a lot of opportunity to bring sustainable development in this space. Now, our work on power, and as well as many other dimensions that are very present in multi-stakeholder collaborative processes, are framed under what we call effective collaborative action, which is the methodology that we use to support countries, programs, initiatives in developing multi-stakeholder collaborative processes and in bringing about collaboration and systems change into food and agricultural commodity systems. And we call it effective collaborative action because we want to make it clear that it's not just about collaborating for collaboration's sake, but it's also about, because we need to bring effective ways of changing the systems. We know that the technical solutions are there and are not enough, and no one institution or organization by itself can make such massive transformation. So collaboration, integration is very much needed. And as we said also, it's not just about collaboration or dialogue for dialogue's sake. It's about how can collaboration drive action to minimize the presence and impact of the negative trends that are affecting food and agricultural commodity systems. Briefly, effective collaborative action showcases different tools and practices that can be used to improve multi-stakeholder collaboration, to bring about new ways of working that can help us connect the dots between different projects, different initiatives. It's a tool for capacity building as well. And it's basically comprised with different elements, 4 building blocks that can help structure the process of bringing about collaborative spaces. But also there are 10 key principles that in a way try to articulate what are the things that we need to attend to when it comes to bringing about effective collaboration. And more will be shared and can be shared about effective collaborative action. There's a lot of material in the FACS community and in a digital platform, and there will be further discovery sessions on this methodology offered virtually as well. So, as I said, my name, I was going to introduce myself now. My name is Maria Soledad Riestra. You can call me Sole. I'm the Senior Advisor on Effective Collaborative Action under the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems team. And I'm originally from Argentina, but based out of Hong Kong. And today, 2 colleagues, Nicolas Pettit and Jethro Pettit, are joining me today in this session as speakers and facilitators. So I'm going to pass it on to Nicolas to introduce himself, and then over to Jethro.
Thanks, Soleil. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. I'm Nicolas Pettit. I'm not related to Jethro. We have almost the same family name. I'm leading the innovation team in the food systems teams at UNDP, and I'm based in Brussels, Belgium. Over to you, Jethro.
Hello, everyone. Buenos dias. Bonjour. My name is Jethro Pettit. I'm based in Italy, originally from the United States and UK. And I'm working with the FACS team on this and several other initiatives related to understanding power within food and agricultural commodity systems. Very briefly, my background, I think there's a slide that goes with this, but yeah, so I've worked for the first kind of almost 20 years directly with NGOs, with civil society, supporting and being involved in community development, but with a strong focus on rural development, sustainable agriculture and agroecology, agroforestry, and natural resource management, as well as public health and reproductive health and other related areas, which I've always sort of worked with in a very integral way with the agricultural natural resources work. And following about 20 years in that sector, I started to gravitate towards research and teaching and training, and spent 15 years at the Institute of Development Studies at Sussex University, which is an interdisciplinary institute focused on development issues, continuing to work on development, but with a very strong focus on methodologies of participation, citizen voice and government responsiveness, accountability, human rights, mainly looking at the relationship between different actors in multi-stakeholder processes, or even indeed in democratic processes or undemocratic processes, to see how the power dynamics affect those dynamics and processes of voice, inclusion, representation, and decision-making. So I sort of come into this space with a very strong interest in how power affects multi-stakeholder processes in food and agriculture. And I think that the frameworks, I hope that the frameworks that we'll be exploring together today will be useful to you, as Soleil said, not only for analysis, but also for thinking about what is to be done and what are the sources of power and the possibilities and opportunities for change in power dynamics. And can these understandings of power help us to be more strategic and effective in the way we collaborate and work? So I'm really looking forward to working with you, and this is very exciting. And if there are any questions as we go along, feel free to jump in. También en español. Bueno. So I'm going to take us into the first sort of reflective exercise, as Sole mentioned, which is a chance to sort of ground this whole session in our lived experience. And then from there, we will begin to move toward conceptualizing that and seeing how we make sense of it, and then how have others made sense of it in other similar challenging processes. And so what we'd like to do is start with a bit of individual reflection, just thinking about yourself and your own work on food and agricultural commodity systems, and thinking about a moment when you felt either powerful or powerless, or you noticed power dynamics in the context in which you were working that might have been helpful or challenging. And what we'll do after you've had a chance to, so you can start thinking about that now. It could be any experience. It helps if it's a particular moment that you can tell a story about, but it could also be a sort of general time when certain power dynamics were evident in your work. And then we will go into pairs for about 10 minutes, and each person will have 5 minutes to tell their story, including the details, not only of how you made sense of it, sort of conceptually, but also just tell the story of what it felt like and what you saw and heard, a little bit more of a description. And then the person who's listening can practice deep listening, which is sort of just being empathetic, listening. You don't need to respond or ask questions, just support the speaker, the other person, to tell their story. So I'm going to hand over to Sandra and Alejandra to put us into pairs.
And I believe our colleagues from the different breakout groups are coming back to the plenary. So welcome back. And over to you, Jethro.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good chance to share. What we'd like to do now is just hear some highlights from your conversations. Just open mic or raise your hand, either way, jump in. And without sharing the stories themselves, because we don't have that much time, it would be good to know just very briefly what your story was about and what kind of power, what sort of came up for you around power, powerlessness, empowerment, what kinds of insights or observations you have about that. So I'll just open the floor and anybody can raise their hand. I don't think I can see everybody, but maybe Alejandra can. Standard
Maybe I
view,
can
maybe.
stop sharing the screen, actually. That might be helpful.
Yeah, maybe stop sharing that we can all see each other. That would be
Yeah.
great. And we'll just go, yeah, terrific. So we can look for any hands.
I'm happy to break the ice. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah,
Thank you so
no, we
much.
had a lovely conversation, and two things that struck me in our conversation was that getting to the position where we felt powerful took a lot of effort, and we were kind of working from a situation where we felt powerless to working towards feeling powerful. And a key elements in that process were networking and really, multiplying contacts with people that were key for achieving a particular goal, and doing so using language and arguments that is close to what they care about, so that they really own, and then you can start collaborating. So it was shifting, and the importance of networking and communication for that, to getting to a powerful space.
Fantastic, Charlotte. Thank you. That's really interesting. We'll definitely come back to that, I'm sure. Anyone else?
Well, if I can share to something, because this is something that Charlotte said, actually, she was my partner, but what really struck me is that she did whatever she did because she believed in it. And she really was convinced that she was doing what she was doing. You know, she was the person behind everything because she cared a lot. And then power came to her. So if you do what you really believe and you care, like truly, you will get the power. Oh, the power will come to you because you are like, I don't know, like so true. So this is something that got me of your story, Charlotte. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. That's really excellent. Great. Anyone else? Any highlights or insights in either the story you told or the story you heard? Yes, is it Malika?
Yeah, hello.
Maika, yeah.
What struck me, maybe it's a bit different. It's the power of having the information and the knowledge and be able to facilitate empowerment of others. And the powerlessness is when the other way is when we don't know what to do, or we don't have the information, or the other side is just not willing to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Malika. Yeah, thank you so much. That is great. We'll definitely come back to that as well. Yeah. So you can just raise your hand or unmute. We have time for a couple more. Okay, Marsha.
Thank you very much. While I was not also in any of the group, I've just joined in. I totally agree with the previous speakers, and particularly with Malika, where I see myself that there's an element also, if you are able to, when you're in power, if you're able to have a platform, or rather I would say like, I would say the subject matter, and able to convince others to join you in that particular discussion, you will allow that power to be with you. Again, as she said, if people are not willing to collaborate, you feel powerless. But again, there are other still ways to ensure, because what I see, the power of technology allows others to use, even if they're not in control of any platform. The platform is like the e-platforms are very able to give us the objectives, and of course the expected results that we have in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Marsha. Yeah, really relevant, and I think it really builds on what was said earlier. There might be time for one more, but I think we'll move on. But I would suggest, if anything occurs to you, to just write it in the chat. Any more insights, observations, feelings that came up around the experiences of power or the ones you heard. Let me just take one more, Mulugeta.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Okay. So I'd like to share with you is a context by when I was powerless, when agricultural extension was abused by political and economic interests. I mean, I used it to be a community level agricultural extension agent, and I was forced to persuade farmers which are not convinced and which I didn't believe in. And it was simply because of a political interest driving and manipulating agricultural extension systems in favor of political and economic interests rather than community interests. And that was the time by when I felt very powerless, disparate, I can say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mulugeta. I have a feeling many of us have experienced that, and I certainly have as well in my work, where there was pressure from powerful interests to pursue certain lines of extension work or community work that you didn't feel comfortable with. So that's very interesting. Great. So please keep adding them to the chat, and we'll have a chance to come back to this a little bit later on. So I'm going to hand back to Soleil just to say a little bit about what came up in the survey before this session, because I think it will resonate with some of the things we've just been talking about.
Yes, thank you, Jethro. And I'll go through this very quickly. But the reason why we wanted to share it is because obviously we are very grateful for those who took the time to fill in this survey. And also it's information. As we are co-creating these definitions of power based on our experience, we've reflected on our own individual experiences, and now we can reflect on our collective insights based on the outcomes of this survey. And I kind of gave a hint inadvertently, but the first question is how many people, or what percentage of respondents do you think that said yes to the question, do you experience power dynamics in your work? You can put it on the chat if you want, but I'm guessing that you know the answer very well. It's 100%. So yeah, we all experience power dynamics, and especially in our work on food and agricultural commodity systems. It's very much ingrained in our day-to-day. And just to share also that we had responses from, as you can see, various people around the world, and working on different spaces and commodities, on themes that are relevant to food and agriculture commodity systems. Now, we also asked to prioritize or to rank what type of power dynamics were present, what kind of challenges you face in your day-to-day work. And the text is a little bit small, but you can see that the top ones are dominance of more powerful actors or stakeholders, parts of food and agricultural commodity systems that dominate, like trade, access to finance, conventional farming methods, demand-driven pricing. And we also had additional insights added by respondents on consumption patterns and how certain dynamics and marketing practices and market practices also establish certain power dynamics around high income, healthy food, and also imbalance in technical knowledge, donor priorities, policy agenda priorities. So many examples that came up around the different ways in which power manifests. How often do you encounter these dynamics? That was something that we asked. And as you can see, from less than once a month to more than once a week. So clearly, this is something that's very present in our work. And when we asked how do these power dynamics or challenges affect or impede the progress of your work, it's from somewhat to strongly. Those were the answers that we got. And some text answers as well, which you are more than welcome to read when we share the presentation, but very relevant to everyone's work here today. The interesting thing, or the hope that I find, is that many people share that they're familiar with methods and tools to help understand and work through power dynamics, and that they found those somewhat effective or effective. So in a way, building our power literacy is helpful, and according to our colleagues here, has proven to make a positive impact. And then in terms of what you hope to get from this session, skills and knowledge, understand where our thinking is in terms of facts, listen to what we have to share, understand how power dynamics play out, and learn about power analysis global trends. So some of these are going to be covered today, and deeper in the deep dive on working with power. So as I said, this is the beginning and the continuation of a longer and deeper journey. So over to you, Jethro, to continue with the session.
Thanks, Soleil. Really useful to see that, and also to see how much experience there is already with methodologies and tools, and hopefully we can change the data a little bit to make it that you feel that these methods are more effective over time. So what we'd like to do is go into another participatory exercise. This time we'll all be together in the same room. We will have a Google slide open that you can click on, and you will be able to go in and write on little post-it notes, virtual post-it notes, to name the different kinds of power you can identify in your work on food and agricultural commodity systems. And that could be anything, the kinds of power that we heard about just now, to do with knowledge and information, to do with self-belief and personal empowerment, to do with the dominance of some actors or parts of the system, as Soli described from the survey. It was a very strong part of it, the sort of political economy dimensions, or experiences of, say, very dominant actors interfering, as Mulugeta shared with his work as an extension officer. So anything, they're just one words, two words, a little phrase. You can just pick one and start writing on it. And if you are having any difficulty with the slides, or you don't feel like writing, you can also write in the chat, and we will transfer those over to the slide.
Jethro, can be in Spanish too?
Pardon?
Can the people write in Spanish also?
Yes, I think people can write in Spanish. Sure. If you want to write in Spanish or French, we'll work it out. I just wanted to thank Ana Maria for her thoughts about power in the chat, and hope people will have a chance to read it, about the importance of being aware of all the power dynamics in your relationships and everyday engagements, and how we ourselves personally prepare face to face to face and navigate these dynamics by building our own capacities to navigate through power. Really important. Do feel free to, yes, I see Mulugeta wrote in the chat. I can add that. You can see as we go along, we're doing a little bit of clustering to begin with, to see what categories come up. And you're welcome to help us with that too, if you feel like moving things around. Great. Well, I sense that we are slowing down a little bit and mainly clustering. I don't know if feel free to unmute yourself and just talk a little bit about what kinds of categories you're seeing coming together. There's a group of things here to do with networks, power with, connections, teamwork. Maybe this market power could go over with financial power. We have a group down here to do with knowledge, knowledge power. I see racial dimensions, which maybe I'll put together with privilege and age. Is sort of to do with these ones here seem to do with identity. Knowledge and learning. Over here in this corner, I see we have self-confidence, self-esteem, capacity to speak up. Something coming up around individual kind of empowerment and voice. I'm going to move knowledge and learning. Is that that's a label maybe? Is that a label?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It's really good. I think we'll probably bring this to a close now. And perhaps during the break, we might do a little bit more work on it to see what kinds of clusters have emerged. But I can see quite a few very clear categories coming up. And maybe what we'll do is review it right after we've had. Let's see.
Excellent. Thank you, Jethro. So is it okay then? Shall we move to the 5-minute break?
Yeah, I think that would be good. And those of us in the team will keep playing with this. And when you come back,
Yes.
feel free to chime in and add more, and we can discuss it. Good. Thanks,
Yeah.
Soleil.
Thank you, Marcia. Yes, we are taking note of all the things that were added on the chat. We're now going to invite you to take a 5-minute break, conscious that we are 2 hours on this session, so good to take a leg stretch or get something to drink. Please don't disconnect your Zoom. Just mute yourself and maybe turn off your camera. We will see you back on the hour, and we are going to start quite promptly. So please come back right on the hour if that's okay. Thank you very much. Would you like us to put the slide again of the notes, Jethro?
If we could just look at it very briefly, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Because I think it'll really help before we dive into the next part. So we just played with it a little bit more. And this is really, really interesting how this is shaping up. You'll see in the sort of upper left corner quite a bit of forms of power that have to do with identity and background, social and cultural power that comes with gender, age, race, some cultural dimensions of power and privilege. So that's very interesting. And then if you go further over to the middle, sort of right down the middle, you have a bunch of things that have to do with politics, institutional power, regulation, regulatory power, decision-making power. And I guess we have leaders' use of power there. So there's a whole area around formal institutional kinds of political and institutional power. Then if you go all the way to the right, on the top, there's a cluster around technological power, communication, information asymmetry. That could probably go together with knowledge, which you have at the bottom. So a whole category of how power relates to knowledge, whose knowledge counts. We heard about that in the example that was shared by Malika and others. And then if you go to the far left again, you have a whole cluster that has to do with sort of lower left, self-confidence, self-esteem, inner power, capacity to speak up. Sort of center left there's a lot of things to do with financial power, market power, resources, ownership, economic power. And then finally, there is this cluster in the sort of lower right to do with power with, or sort of collective power, connections, networking, interpersonal power. And I think what I find interesting about this is that some of these we experience as sort of domination, coercion, power over, sort of obstacles to making power relations more equitable, whether it's in the formal sphere or more informally, to do with identity or to do with who has knowledge or whose knowledge counts, or who owns and who has economic power. And then there are some that really have to do more with being empowered. And we heard from people talking about, how what you believe in gives you power, what knowledge you have access to gives you power. I think very interestingly, we also heard that if people share the same vision and beliefs and knowledge, they're more likely to be able to act together and to feel empowered collectively. So there's that connection between knowledge and collective action. And the fact that power can come from collaboration, as Marcia shared, through shared knowledge and the possibilities of technology to allow that. So I think, this is really rich, and we can see that power is multidimensional. We can jump onto the next slide, I guess, and just sort of dive into a little bit of a sharing from my side of some frameworks of power that people have found useful. And these frameworks come out of decades of experience, and also not my own, but many people's experiences, and academic research, particularly in political science, sociology, social theory, looking at issues of participation, democracy, and voice, decision-making, and how power dynamics affect the possibilities of more equal voice coming to the table, of decisions really reflecting everybody's interests. And what we find from all of this is that it seems to be very relevant to the kinds of dynamics that come up in food and agricultural commodity systems, and particularly when we're trying to facilitate multi-stakeholder processes that bring stakeholders together around a shared agenda, and that the challenges of getting everybody to the table, the challenges of gatekeeping, of who is in control of the agenda, of who can speak and who can't. And we begin to see that power is, quite messy. There isn't any one definition of it, as we saw with our own exercise just now, that it's very fluid. There are aspects of it that are very structural and systemic and institutional, other aspects that are based very much on relationships and dynamics and the context, which is changing all the time. We saw that there are a lot of dynamics related to identity, to gender, race, ethnicity, class, sexuality, people's history, their location, etc. And we also saw that there were aspects to do with how people experience power internally in their bodies and their minds and their hearts, and that sort of personal sense of disempowerment, and how we transform that into a sense of having agency and power. So I think one thing we can draw from this so far is that power isn't necessarily good or bad. It's actually probably quite essential to getting anything done, but it depends on how it's used, and leads us to ask, are there ways that we can harness the good parts of power and make power work for positive transformation in food and agricultural systems and other processes. So what I'd like to do is share a framework that I think you'll see resonates somewhat with what we've just done. And this, as I mentioned, grew out of decades of academic research and experience and practitioner experience on how power is manifest and experienced, especially in processes of decision making and setting priorities and multi-stakeholder kinds of processes, or democratic spaces. And one kind that's very obvious, the little bit of the iceberg that's sticking up, is that there's a lot of power that's very visible. It's often formal, it's often legitimate. It's decision making, setting the rules. It could be parliaments, setting budgets in organizations. It could be boards of directors or executives. It could be courts in the legal system. That doesn't mean that it's always fair. It could be that that visible power is heavily influenced by special interests. And that's where we start to look below the waterline and start to look a little bit at, well, actually, who is setting the agenda? And we heard about that in the previous exercise. So powerful interests might be, and that could be civil society as well, if they have voice, trying to influence that formal decision making by advocacy, lobbying, setting the agenda through narratives and priorities that might meet the needs of certain interest groups. It could also be more sort of insidious forms of influencing, like corruption, like putting pressure on an extensionist to deliver certain kinds of packets of seeds that might meet the needs of certain corporations. And I certainly experienced that in my decades of working in agricultural development, pressure to sort of conform to certain technological packages that weren't really in the interests of farmers. So there's a lot of that kind of influencing, and sometimes it even takes even more insidious forms, like paramilitaries, armed groups that are working in the service of extractive industries or certain political groups. And that, it can take a very organized crime money laundering and things. So it can take quite insidious forms, but it can also take quite legal forms. So some of it is hidden and some of it is quite dark and kind of in Latin America, often when we do these workshops, people differentiate between poder escondido and poder oculto, and the oculto being more, say, the influence of illegal organized crime um, and paramilitary activity. And then if you dive even deeper, though, below this activity, which is actors pursuing their interests legally or illegally, formally or informally, there's another layer of power which is quite powerful and probably in some ways even bigger. And that is just the dominant norms, beliefs, the values that people hold, the ideologies, the way those get expressed in kind of dominant narratives about what is normal. For example, certain kinds of agricultural practices and systems are deemed normal, and others are sort of called alternative. That in itself is a sort of binary that puts the dominant narrative, gives it a lot more credibility and force. And others have to sort of fight to get their alternative narrative about what agriculture could look like into the mainstream. And the invisible power often runs along the axes that we saw around identity as well, around gender, around race, around sort of holdovers from colonial attitudes and neo-colonial practices um, that that uphold certain value systems and discredit others. So there's a whole area there to do with beliefs. And then if we dive even deeper, we can see that a lot of these ways of performing the forms of power become very institutionalized. They become very structural and hardened. And we saw that in your examples of financial power, markets, trade agreements, these sort of systems that get hardwired that then have to be navigated through, even if they're really at the surface of more powerful interests. And those are also often linked to things like colonial legacy, white supremacy, and forms of extractive capitalism that can be very destructive to the environment and also to people. So those become kind of hard systems that are often very difficult to transform and challenge. But I think one thing I would say about this is that it looks and sounds quite sort of negative and heavy, and it's a lot of power over. And these are all nested within each other. They're all interconnected. But each of these forms of power, and we sometimes call them arenas, are also being contested all the time. In any given moment, there are opportunities to challenge these, to hold up alternatives, to show by example what else might be possible, to articulate other narratives, to influence decision makers, to all the positive forms of power that we saw earlier can come into play here to shift these. They're not static. And I think the fluid diagram kind of helps us to think of it as something that's constantly changing and can be changed with our own action. And that kind of takes us to another framework, which we sometimes call transformative power or expressions of power. Oh, before I jump to that, I'll just ask Charles to unmute himself and ask a question or say something.
Thanks, Jethro. Yeah, I'm just interested because your bottom layer is the kind of system, it's a bit more structural, and the middle layer looks a bit more like mindsets, and often they're the flip the other way around. So in the sort of the Donella Meadows levers of change, sort of mindsets is kind of the most fundamental level, and then structures is a reflection of mindsets. Obviously, they are interrelated and sort of self-reinforcing, but is there any sort of particular reason why you've put the structures and systems below the values, ideologies, and narratives?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And Charles, I really think it could go either way, and I really agree with you. that I would probably put the mindset part as the sort of the water that we're all swimming in. In a way, it's not part of the iceberg, it's the environment that makes the iceberg possible. And I think the only reason perhaps that it comes at the end is that for many years, power academics and analysts were working with this three-dimensional framework. It kind of evolved in that way. And then people were looking for a way to articulate the more systemic and structural part, and it kind of came at the bottom. But I think you could easily flip them, and it's a really good point. And I think it highlights the importance of mindsets, beliefs, and narratives as being, in a sense, kind of the essence of where all the power is solidifying. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
I think Charles's question also really helps us to remind us that this is just one particular way of framing this. And it's important when you're doing power analysis to be free with it and to organize things in a way that makes sense to you and the people you're working with, and even to give them other names. And I like the fact that Charles mentioned mindset, because often in workshops, people end up with mindset as the name of invisible power. And as I mentioned, in Latin America, they often use poder oculto as an additional category of illegal organized power and corruption and violence. And sometimes for the visible power, people put sort of policy and decision making. So you can give your own names to them and move them around and present them in any way that's useful.
Sorry, Jethro,
So
just to say that we have a couple of comments on the chat.
Thank you.
One
Yeah.
from Camila around the impact of EUDR over small producers. And we've been talking so much about EUDR in terms of the forms of power. So yeah, over to you if you want to say something about it, and also happy to chip in. And then
Totally,
Malika,
I think it would be great if you could chip in on that, because I know yesterday we talked the other day quite a lot about it. So,
yeah.
Or you could bring it in later when you talk about it, either way.
Exactly. Just briefly to say, this is a great example, Camila, of in the next section, we're going to go into breakout rooms. And the idea is to bring a topic or something that you want to think of in terms of the different forms of power, and EUDR is clearly one of them. What we are seeing in this sense is that with the EUDR, you can really see all the different forms of power coming up. The visible power of making and enforcing rules. The EUDR as such is a new regulation, right? The hidden power of setting the agenda, who gets to say what sustainable production is and isn't. Very much linked to invisible power, but what we also discussed as well in the past session is how this phenomenon is also raising some interesting questions around power on the other side of the spectrum. So for the producers, for the countries that are impacted by the EUDR, we are noticing a lot of questions around, well, how do I respond to this? And compliance might not necessarily be the immediate response that they're finding. Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting dynamics there to explore in terms of how EUDR is also triggering different kinds of invisible power and hidden power on both sides, the owners and the writers of the regulation, but also the recipients. And we could take a very long time to unpack this, but I would welcome you to think of it deeper and more into the breakout groups, because it's a very, very good and contested hot topic, I would say. And then the same, Malika, for your experience. Please bring it into the breakout group discussion, because I'm sure that as a women-owned cooperative, you navigate through all of these power dynamics on a very daily basis. Also, Elizabeth is asking what are the kind of power that will help us to collaborate effectively with farmers and breeders. So in your experience, Jethro, of working with producers, what's your take on that?
I think this would be a really good moment actually to go to the next framework because it's all about the different forms of sort of positive power and agency that we have. And maybe I can think of some ways to apply that to Malika's question. So what we saw before was sort of the way power is operating out there for the better or worse and the different ways of contesting it and experiencing it. This framework is a little bit more about sort of personal and individual and collective agency. And we talked a lot about that before with your sticky notes about personal power and self-esteem and voice, and also the power of collective action and shared and teamwork and shared knowledge. So I think you'll see everything in here. They're all very interrelated and often kind of need to be woven together to really make power transformative. The first one is the power within, which you talked a lot about earlier, the sense of self-esteem and self-knowledge that gives you confidence, hope, uh, sometimes the capacity to speak in difficult situations or to navigate when there's difficult power dynamics. And that's a long process of sort of internal work, but often done with others and collectively so that it's not just individual, not just up to you individually, um, but something that can be done in an intentional way with colleagues and with friends. The next one I guess I would go to would be the power with. So because we talked a lot about building common ground, and somebody talked about how having a shared knowledge or a shared vision gives you the possibility to act together. So it kind of connects with power 4 on the right. But this is about, yeah, collective action, teamwork, mutual support, a sense of belonging, all of these things. And you talked a lot in your stickies about networking and building alliances and having relationships and building relationships. And that's very much at the core of the collaborative part of effective collaborative action. So there's a lot of power that can come with not being alone and with building those networks and relationships and having common ground around them. And I think a lot of that common ground is to do with what we're calling here power 4, which is the process of developing a shared vision of where you're going, shared values and sort of world mindset or beliefs that can hold you together and help shape the alternatives that you're working for. And that relates to what Ruth was saying earlier about kind of believing what you're doing, you know, taking the time to imagine that difference that you're trying to make individually and collectively, and to articulate it to the point where you actually have a narrative that you're working with and a set of values and a sense of direction. And I think in a way that power 4 becomes kind of the engine of the whole thing, becomes almost like Charles was saying, it's the enabling environment for being able to act, for being able to affect power relations. And power 2, I think, is the very traditional notion of agency. It's just the capacity to do things. So there you have, you know, skills and abilities to speak, question, make choices, and take action. And I think it's the one we're probably most familiar with, but it's often disabled by not having the power within or the power with or the power 4. That's the sort of actual moment of action. So this is a useful framework, especially for the question that Malika was just asking. And I think in my experience with agricultural extension and promoting kind of sustainable upland farming in Central America and in Southeast Asia, that just going into the farming techniques was often not the starting point. That the starting point was often a much more basic processes of dialogue, communication about what people's hopes were for their lives, what their vision was for their families. And often, surprisingly, we found that starting with asking people what it was they wanted and what their priorities were, and those priorities often had to do um, with food and nutrition, with actually eating the food, having food to eat, and with their animals and their animals' health. And we would often start around animal health and child survival and nutrition and maternal health. And then from there, move to production and to sustainable farming techniques that would produce the food that could be eaten and sold for cash. Um, so I think asking people what they want and starting with collective processes of setting priorities and being willing to work in a very integral way that goes beyond the particular technical intervention and to try to connect the cart of the technical support to the horse of what the people want to take them forward. And I think together with that, we found that organizing associations, co-ops, community groups, and so forth, that the social organization part of it was really key to being able to maybe build the road that the horse and carriage go on. So, but I think these things show up all the time, but we sometimes lose sight of them if we're looking for a very particular technical intervention or outcome. And that wider social and cultural glue, and especially the vision of where you're going that gives you the energy to move forward is really key. So I think what we'd like to do now, unless there's another hand, any comments? Don't want to cut anyone off, and I can't see them, so if somebody else sees hands, let me know. But you're going to have a chance now to talk about this in a pair with another person. And we'll put you into groups of two again. And you could have each person, again, think of a situation that you're currently working on, an initiative or a project that involves some kind of challenging power dynamic. And you might spend the whole time on one person's case, or you might have time to share two cases, but just see what you're interested in doing with your partner. And so, first of all, just to briefly describe the situation so people know the context and whatever the food or commodity is, and et cetera. And then briefly identify, well, what kind of power dynamics are at work here? And you can use the four arenas of power and the transformative power or other things that came up in our earlier brainstorm as a reminder of the kinds of dynamics that were going on. And so first of all, so try to identify some of those dynamics and give them a name. And then think about what would you or others do differently? What could you do differently to mitigate the negative forms of power and to enhance the positive expressions of power? So it's a chance to kind of step forward into action and strategy. Are there any questions before we go into groups? And it doesn't, we're not looking for rocket science or using the same language. It's just a chance to really reflect on your experience on a case and see whether these particular framings and understandings of power are useful to you in making sense of it and in thinking about what to do. Okay. Oh, is that Alejandra? Did you have a question, or are you going to
No,
jump
no,
us
I don't
into?
have a question. Sorry. Whenever you say Jethro, the groups are ready.
Okay, let's go to the groups and we'll see you and we'll report back with some brief highlights.
And hope you had a fruitful conversation. Over to you, Jethro.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I hope you had some good conversations in your groups. And we're not going to have time to actually report back, but I do hope it was useful, and we'd love to hear from you in the survey at the end. It might be a chance to put in a few comments about any kind of key insights or ahas that came to you during that conversation you just had. And just to let you know that this discovery session is just the very beginning of a process that will last till the end of this year, at least, looking at how can an awareness of power help us to navigate the power dynamics in food and agricultural commodity systems. And beyond this sort of introductory session, which is very much a kind of overview, the idea is that we will be having what we're calling a deep dive, and that will involve 4 sessions instead of 1. And you'll be with the same group going all the way through. It will be spread with a few weeks in between each session. And it will be an action learning model or action research where between each session, you will have opportunities to apply the frameworks as you just did to your own cases and experiences. And you'll have the opportunity to go beyond power analysis to actually be thinking about what does this mean for strategy and action, and what can I do in my job? What can we do, me and my colleagues? What are others doing that we could be more aware of to have a more joined up and systemic approach to what we're doing? And what you'll find is that each of these sort of arenas of power has its own logic in terms of what action and strategy can be taken. Are we shifting narratives? Are we lobbying and doing advocacy? Are we trying to transform visible spaces? Are we working on structures and systems? So you begin to see strategies breaking out from there and possibilities for action and how they relate to each other to create, if power is multidimensional, how do we create a more multiple strategies to transform it? So that's the hope, and we hope you'll consider joining one of the deep dive groups. You're all warmly invited. So I'm going to hand over to Nicolas, who's going to share a bit about how power has been sort of looked at and understood within the FACS community in the kinds of initiatives you've been taking in some of the communities of practice and research.
Thanks, Jethro. And I was with Camila in the breakout, and we were talking about deforestation in Brazil and cattle companies, slaughterhouse, and I really want to have a deep dive on that because it's so representative of the arenas of power that you presented, and also so what can we do? What are the approaches? Because it's such a challenge that so many of us have been faced working in commodities. So anyway, just a case for going to the next stage of deep dive on those topics. So as we've seen, power is key for collaboration. You can put the next slide, and you've seen it's a key principle for us in our work on effective collaborative action. And basically, power, equity, or inclusion is always one of the hottest topics that we have in multi-stakeholder processes. And we are zooming in on multi-stakeholder processes because this is a space where UNDP has been actively playing in agriculture, in food systems, convening multi-stakeholder platforms, multi-stakeholder forums, etc. And so usually, power is usually mentioned as the #1 challenge amongst participants. So in training, as you have seen, like the 100% of people have experienced power dynamics in the work that you do. So the effectiveness of our work on multi-stakeholder collaboration basically depends on how successful we are in stimulating participation, diversity, equity, etc. And we also saw that you cannot talk about system change without talking about power, as any transformation is deeply political. So basically, considering this importance, we recognized a few years ago that we have a lot to learn on the topic, and we have actually many blind spots in the way we operate ourselves in our work as practitioners, working with country office and supporting others in this work, but also as an organization in convening those multi-stakeholder dialogue and processes. And so what can we do with those blind spots? So as a UNDP organization, as UNDP, what is the power we hold? How are we setting the agenda? How are we designing projects? And, really trying to look deeply at that. And so we used what we call a collaborative inquiry approach, which is basically a space to bring stakeholders together to inquire into critical issues that they are facing. And it's a kind of a peer-to-peer investigation. And it's very effective for learning, for generating insights, but also for strengthening trust and relationships. So we've done a number of cycle of that collaborative inquiry. You can see on the slides, we don't have so much time. So just to say that last year, 2 years ago, we did one on power, and we convened around 70 participants with the question, which was, how can we work more effectively with power in multi-stakeholder processes for food and agriculture system transformation? Next slide. And basically, we unpacked through that discussion and collaborative inquiry 3 key ideas on working with power. And you've heard already some from Jethro. There are many different forms of power, and power is neither good nor bad. That was presented by Jethro just before, the visible, the invisible, and the hidden. And so obviously, how do you make these forms of power more visible was a key questions that we explore. And another one that is maybe less coming to mind directly, we always think about the big concentration of power, like I just said in Brazil, but actually working with power starts with ourselves. And how do you ensure that the inner work is part of the process? And how do you ensure that the different stakeholders recognize the power that they hold? And so you can see here actually the wheel of privilege that maybe some of you know already. What is the privilege that we have, and how this playing out in, as I said, as you design a project, as you facilitate a discussion, etc. And finally, a lot of us are involved in facilitating dialogue processes, and that's mostly about navigating through power dynamics as those processes are embedded in power structures. Next slide. This is just an example of how power is playing out in multi-stakeholder process. That's just an example in the Dutch food system, Dutch food chain, sorry, where you can see the concentration. So, you have 6,500 food manufacturers, 1,500 suppliers, but there's only 5 purchasing companies. So imagine the power of those 5 purchasing companies compared to the farmers, or compared to the 16 million consumers. And also the supermarkets, there's 25 supermarket concepts that are holding a lot of the power there. So, it's important to make power explicit, to talk about it, to make it visible, and use the framework that Jethro presented when looking at it. But often, we make these homogeneous assumptions that farmers is an homogeneous group, or traders or retailers, the private sector, or the farmers or the workers. Yet it's very different when you see here the private sector, the power that a purchasing company holds compared to a supplier or a manufacturer. Anyway, so how we have more nuance when we think about power. So I'm just going to share very quickly 2 slides just to start unpacking about so what, like once you've made the power visible, what can you do? How do you move from the current practice to what is actually needed for working more effectively with power? So next slide is actually just showing when you design a multi-stakeholder process, the current reality is usually we have a lack of awareness, space, and even priority to discuss power dynamics. We're rushing for giving it on time to the donor, for making sure the project proposal has all the different annexes, and we say we're participatory, but often we cut down the time involved in participation, etc. So power is really seen as an afterthought, and we're not investing in the design stage in understanding power dynamics. And it's often difficult to incorporate alternative viewpoints, etc. So we're going to share those slides. I'm not going to go into the details here. But what is needed is what we start doing here today is how do you develop power, what we call literacy. So how do you build up knowledge, interpretation skills so that you have a better understanding of the power dynamics at play. And as I said, how do you avoid treating stakeholders as very homogeneous group? And you can conduct a power analysis or power check during the exercise, but also how do you are open about your own blind spots, as I mentioned. You know, what's the privilege you hold when you're designing those things or you're facilitating those meetings. So I'm not going to go through the details. This is just to start showing what we have been looking at, and we're going to share also the report with you. There's a report that Sandra just shared, and we have a full report on working with power in multi-stakeholder process. The last slide is interesting because it's really focusing on food systems. And we use a specific report from civil society to start unpacking what, next slide, please, how power is playing out specifically in the context of food system. And so we use a report from the panel experts on sustainable food system because this report is very power sensitive, and it gives a useful language for discussion. And so, you know, as we've seen, power is highly concentrated in the hand of some mega corporations. You have land grabs, resource grabs, opaque supply chains. It's not clear what's happening. There's a confusion of so many certification claims, and MSPs are completely depoliticized. You know, it's just technical solutions without looking at the political aspects of MSPs. Again, I'm not going into the details, but what is needed is how can we take, you know, a more critical view of the power that exists in global food systems, and in particular this dominant globalized agro-industrial commodity approach to agriculture. That again, you can see in the monoculture in Brazil, beef, soy, cotton, etc. And there's a lot of discussion around also about restructuring completely the governance that exists in food systems, and even for UN agri-food agencies to start reforming the way they do decision-making, etc. So, and challenging when we say multi-stakeholder, is it truly multi-stakeholder in terms of inclusions and in terms of being political, etc. And of course, making power visible, as we are discussing. So there's a long list there, and there's more in the report. So I encourage you to read the report. And the next slide, sorry, Soleil, I know we have 3 minutes left. It's just to say what we're doing ourselves in our team. So we do you know, capacity building, leadership development, and so we help practitioners, and we help ourselves, even in our own team, to build that power literacy through community of practice, deep dive, etc. We facilitate multi-stakeholder processes where we're trying to be, you know, taking into account those power considerations. We provide advisory support, so we help people conduct power analysis or use a number of tools and practices that Jethro starts mentioning. And we develop guidance, communications, and report on the issue. And this year, we're going to develop a specific guidance together with Jethro on working with power in the context of food systems. Finally, we are actually this year designing a new flagship initiative on food and power, which is really looking into taking this to the next stage, you know, beyond building capacity. So what, you know, what exactly are we going to do to shift or to better balance power dynamics at either the macro level, some of we've seen, or more the meso or micro level? And, you know, anyone interested in that today, please get in touch with Soleil, myself, etc., and we will give you more details. But back to you, Soleil. This is just a quick overview of what we've been doing.
Thank you, Nicola. Thank you very much. And very important to share all of this information. And also, as Nicola mentioned, feel free to reach out to us if you want to dig deeper into any of these points. But just to conclude today's session, first of all, thank you very much for being here. 2 hours online is a lot, and so many interesting conversations, fantastic insights, and very thought-provoking reflections came up. We do kindly ask you to take 2 more minutes to answer this very quick feedback survey, because we obviously take in all your input and insight to continue developing content. There's also a question around if you want to be notified about the deep dive. A question on this poll is for you to add your name and email so that we make sure that we reach out to you first, in terms of giving you a spot in those deep dives. So yeah, please take a couple of minutes, answer these questions, help us get more insights into how to continue improving these sessions and running more of them. And reach out to us anytime. I'll put my email on the chat so that you can copy and paste it if you need to. And make sure you join the FACS community and the digital platform, because that's where you can find all the content of the different sessions that are run. And we will send everything over email as well. Yeah, so thank you very much to the FACS community team that's present today. Sandra, Alejandra, they make these sessions happen in the behind the scenes of complementing the speakers with all the rich information that you see on the chat and moderating as well the breakout groups. And the FACS community as such. So there are sort of technical and IT infrastructure for knowledge management and learning. And thank you, Jethro, and thank you also, Nicola, for sharing all your expertise and wonderful knowledge. On time, we are on the hour, so thank you for your feedback. And we will see you hopefully in the deep dive.